All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
The leather of the therapy couch is cold and gritty against my palm, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat in the room. I'm digging my nails into it, focusing on the texture to anchor myself, to stop from floating away into the sheer absurdity of this moment. Dr. Evans' office is all soft beiges and calming greens, a curated oasis of tranquility that feels like the most violent lie I've ever been told. A single painting of a serene lake hangs on the wall behind her, and I want to scream at it, to shatter its placid surface with a rock. "Evelyn," Dr. Evans says, her voice a practiced, gentle instrument. "You mentioned you had something you wanted to discuss today. Something that's been bothering you." Daniel shifts beside me. He's been shifting for the last 10 minutes, a constant nervous fidgeting that sets my teeth on edge. He's wearing the blue shirt I bought him for his birthday, the one that brings out the gray in his eyes. My husband, of 11 years. The father of my child. "It's probably nothing," I say, my voice sounding thin and reedy, like it's coming from another room. "It's silly. It's not silly if it's bothering you," Dr. Evans encourages. "This is a safe space." I take a breath. "It's not silly. It's a splinter in my mind, festering for weeks." It started with the company retreat in Breckenridge. He'd come back tanned and energized, full of stories about team-building exercises and a breakthrough on the quarterly projections. He'd told the story about Dave from accounting getting hilariously lost on a hike 3 times. To his parents, to our friends, to me over wine. Each time, the story was identical. The same cadence, the same punchline, the same detail about the specific type of pine tree Dave had mistaken for a trail marker. Daniel is a good storyteller, but he's not that good. He embellishes, he forgets details. He's a broad strokes man. This story was polished, perfect, a diamond of anecdote. It had the feel of a story that had been told and retold, refined in the telling to someone else. "The retreat," I begin, not looking at him, focusing on the stupid, serene lake. "You told that story about Dave. And it was just very detailed. Unnaturally so." Daniel's body goes still. The fidgeting stops. The silence that follows is a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs. "What are you implying, Evie?" he asks. His voice is careful, too careful. A door clicking shut. "I'm not implying. I'm just saying it was odd. It didn't sound like you." I force myself to turn and look at him. His face is a mask of confused indignation, but his eyes are darting towards Dr. Evans, looking for an ally. He's performing. "It was a memorable weekend," he says, a defensive edge creeping into his tone. "I guess I just remembered it clearly." "Sorry if my memory offends you." Dr. Evans looks between us. "Evelyn, why did this particular story stick with you?" "Why? Why?" Because the night he came back, his skin smelled like a different sunscreen than the one we own. Because he'd used a phrase I'd never heard him use before. Because for the first time in years, he hadn't looked at me like he was seeing me, he'd looked through me, at something, or someone else. "It was the detail," I repeat, feeling foolish, feeling small. It just felt rehearsed. Daniel lets out a short, exasperated laugh. "It's a sound meant to diminish me, to paint me as paranoid. This is ridiculous. You dragged us to therapy because you didn't like the way I told a story?" "It's not about the story, Daniel." The words burst out of me, louder than I intended. The anger of the couch is gone. I'm adrift. "It's about you. You came back different. Distant. You've been distant for months. Work has been hell, Evelyn. You know that. But I'm here, aren't I? I'm trying." He throws his hands up, the picture of the misunderstood, put upon husband. The performance is flawless. I almost believe it. But then Dr. Evans speaks, her voice cutting through the drama. "Daniel, Evelyn's perception is her reality. Her feeling that something is off is valid, whether the reason is the story or something else. Perhaps we should explore what different feels like to her." Daniel deflates slightly, cornered by therapist speak. He runs a hand through his hair. "Fine, whatever. Explore away." The room is silent again, save for the low hum of the air conditioner. I watch him. I see the pulse hammering in his neck. I see the sheen of sweat on his temple. I see the way he won't quite meet my eyes. And in that suspended moment, a cold, terrible clarity washes over me. It's not just a feeling. It's a certainty. It's not work, is it? I whisper. The words are barely audible. He doesn't answer. He looks at Dr. Evans, a silent plea in his eyes. Daniel? Dr. Evans prompts. He closes his eyes. A long, slow breath escapes him. When he opens them, he's not looking at her anymore. He's looking at me, and the performance is over. The mask is gone. In its place is a profound, weary shame. It's an expression I have never seen on his face before. It tells me everything. The world narrows to a pinhole. The beige walls, the green accents, the stupid lake painting, they all bleed away into a roaring, white noise. There is only his face, its honest, gut-wrenching guilt. The foundation of my life, of our 11 years, of our home, our family, isn't just cracked. It vaporizes. It was never there. I am standing on air, and I am falling. The first sound I hear is my own gasp, a raw, ragged thing torn from the deepest part of me. It's the sound of everything breaking at once. Then, the white noise is replaced by a scream inside my head, so loud and endless it's a miracle the windows don't shatter. I don't cry. I don't move. I just stare at the truth sitting next to me in the shape of the man I loved, and I feel the architecture of my soul, the careful, proud design I'd built, collapse into dust and rubble. The drive home from Dr. Evans' office was a silence so profound it had its own weight, its own pressure. It was a physical entity in the car with us, a third passenger made of solidified shame and shattered glass. Daniel didn't try to speak. What could he possibly say? The truth was out, a vile, writhing thing on the floor of the therapist's office, and neither of us could pretend it wasn't there anymore. He just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on the road ahead as if navigating a hurricane. I stared out the window at the familiar streets of Boulder, Colorado. The jagged, beautiful outline of the Flatirons against the blue sky, a sight that usually filled me with a sense of solidity and home, now looked like a cruel joke. The world was exactly the same. The coffee shops were still open, students still lounged on the grass, the sun still dappled through the leaves of the aspens. How could it all just go on? My entire universe had just been unmade, and the world was indifferent. It was the most isolating feeling I have ever known. He pulled into the driveway of the house we designed together. The modern angular structure with its floor-to-ceiling windows had been our dream. We'd spent nights sketching ideas on tracing paper, arguing over the pitch of the roof, choosing the reclaimed barnwood for the accent wall. It was a testament to us, to our shared vision. Now, it felt like a beautiful tomb. I was out of the car before he could turn off the engine, fumbling with my keys, my hand shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. I needed walls. I needed to be away from him. The door swung open, and I practically fell inside, kicking off my shoes, a habit so ingrained it happened even now, in the apocalypse. He followed me in, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch was deafening. "Evelyn," he began, his voice hoarse. "Don't." The word came out sharp, a shard of glass. I couldn't bear to hear my name in his mouth. Not now, maybe not ever again. I walked to the kitchen, needing space, needing the cold, hard island between us. I gripped the cool quartz countertop, my head bowed, trying to breathe. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. It was a pathetic sound. A tiny, worthless offering placed on the altar of our ruined marriage. Sorry, the word echoed in the vast, open-plan space we'd been so proud of. Sorry for what? For the affair? For getting caught? For the 11 years of lies that had suddenly retroactively poisoned every good memory? "Who is she?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't turn around. I stared at the grain in the countertop, tracing its lines. A long pause. I could hear him breathing. Melissa. The name landed like a punch to the gut. Melissa. Melissa from college. The one who got away. The story I'd heard 100 times. The youthful romance he'd always framed as a bittersweet footnote to his life before me. I'd even felt a little sorry for him when he told it. How stupid I was. How long? My throat was so tight the words were strangled. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year. I did the math instantly, a torturous calculus of betrayal. Our anniversary dinner. My birthday. Parent-teacher conferences for our son, Leo. All those times he was late, all those weekends he'd spent working, he'd been with her. Building a parallel life in the shadows of ours. Why? This was the question that burned hottest. It wasn't about sex. It was about why. Was I not enough? Was our life, this beautiful, hard-won life we had built, so inadequate? He was silent for so long, I finally turned around. The look on his face was one of utter misery, but it wasn't the answer I needed. I don't know, he finally said, a helpless shrug. It just happened. We reconnected online, and it started with just talking. Talking, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. You talked to her. What did you talk about, Daniel? Did you complain about me? About our life? Did you tell her I was boring? That I was too focused on my work? That I'd let myself go? The questions tumbled out, each one a lash, wanting to draw blood. No. God, no, Evie, it wasn't about you. Don't call me that, I screamed, the sound raw and alien in our quiet kitchen. Don't you ever call me that again? It was entirely about me. You did this to us. You did this to me. You looked me in the eye every single day for 6 months, and you lied. The dam broke. The shock that had frozen me began to melt into a white-hot, consuming rage. I pushed away from the counter, pacing the length of the kitchen like a caged animal. The emotion was too big for my body. It needed an outlet. My eyes landed on the dining table. Our dining table. The solid oak one we'd found at a flea market in Denver and spent a weekend sanding and refinishing together. We'd hosted countless dinners at that table. We'd eaten breakfast there as a family this very morning, him reading the paper, Leo chattering about a school project, me drinking my coffee. The normalcy of it was a sickening farce. With a cry that was half sob, half roar, I grabbed the edge of the table and flipped it. It was heavier than I expected, but the rage gave me strength. It went over with a satisfying, crashing crunch of wood and shattering ceramic. The vase of tulips I'd bought yesterday exploded against the hardwood floor, water and petals and jagged pieces flying everywhere. Daniel flinched back, his eyes wide with alarm. Evelyn, stop! Stop? I laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. You break my entire life and you want me to stop? My gaze swept the room, looking for something else to destroy. Something of his. I yanked open a cabinet and pulled out a set of ridiculously expensive whiskey glasses, a gift from his boss. One by one, I hurled them into the fireplace, the crystal shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. Please, he pleaded, holding his hands out as if approaching a wild animal. Please, just calm down. Let's talk about this. There is nothing to talk about, I shouted, tears finally streaming down my face, hot and furious. You talked enough. For 6 months you talked. To her. I was crying in earnest now, the rage mingling with the gut-wrenching grief, making me shake uncontrollably. I needed to get out. I couldn't be in this house, this monument to our lies. I couldn't be near him. I stumbled toward the back door, fumbling with the handle, and burst out into the cool Colorado evening. I ran across the deck, down the steps, into the backyard, gulping in the fresh air like I was drowning. I ended up in the middle of the lawn, wrapping my arms around myself, sobbing so hard my ribs ached. He didn't follow me. He stayed inside, watching me from the window, a ghost in our broken home. I looked around at our yard. The swing set we put in for Leo. The flower beds I planted. The grill where Daniel cooked burgers every Sunday in the summer. Every single thing was a reminder, a landmine of memory. My eyes fell on the fire pit. The one we gathered around with friends, toasting marshmallows, sharing stories under the stars. A new, more focused kind of rage ignited in me, calmer, colder. I walked back inside, past a silent Daniel, and went straight to our bedroom. I ignored him completely. I went to his side of the closet and started pulling things out. Not the practical things, not the suits or the work shirts. The sentimental things. The stupid, ugly sweater his mother had knit him, that he never wore but refused to get rid of. The running shoes from the marathon he'd run 5 years ago. A box of old love letters from me, I realized with a fresh wave of nausea. I took it all. I marched back outside, dumped the armful of his history, his identity into the cold stone fire pit. I went back inside, to his office, and grabbed the framed photo from his desk, a picture of him and Melissa from college, that I'd always thought was a funny, nostalgic relic. I'd even been the one to frame it. I threw it on the pile. It landed with a crack of glass. Daniel was at the back door now, watching, his face pale. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I found the can of lighter fluid we used for the grill, soaked the pile thoroughly, and struck a match. The whoosh of flame was instantaneous, a hot, roaring catharsis against the twilight. I stood back, watching the edges of the sweater curl and blacken, the photo melt, the old shoes smolder. I wasn't burning his things. I was burning the man I thought he was. I was burning the 11 years I believed in. I was burning the future we were supposed to have. The flames leaped high, painting dancing, angry shadows on the house we built together. I didn't cry anymore. I just watched it burn, feeling the heat on my skin, and for the first time since that therapy couch, I felt a sliver of control. It was destructive, it was chaotic, but it was mine. This pain was mine. This rage was mine. And this purification by fire was the first step of my new, lonely path. The ashes in the fire pit were cold, a damp gray smear in the pale morning light. The air still carried the faint, acrid scent of burned plastic and memories. I'd spent the night on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that didn't smell like him, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house creak and settle. Every sound was a potential footstep, a door opening, and my entire body was a tightly coiled spring of dread. He'd stayed in the bedroom. The chasm between us was now physical, mapped by the hallway floorboards. But the night, with its isolating silence, was the easy part. The day brought with it an unavoidable, terrifying reality: Leo, our son, 8 years old. A universe of innocence and trust contained in one small, freckled face. He was at a sleepover at his best friend's house, due home this morning. The normalcy of that. The playdate permission slip I'd signed just 2 days ago, the packed overnight bag, felt like it belonged to a different lifetime, to a different family. I heard Daniel moving around in the kitchen before I saw him. The cautious clink of a coffee mug, the sigh of the refrigerator door, the sounds of a ghost haunting his own life. I sat up, the blanket falling away. I felt hollowed out, scraped raw. My eyes were swollen, my head throbbed. There was no design, no blueprint for this. I walked into the kitchen. He was standing by the sink, staring out the window at the ruined fire pit, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. He'd made enough for two. The gesture, once automatic and kind, now felt like a grotesque parody. "He'll be home in an hour," I said. My voice was flat, stripped of all emotion. It was the voice of a project manager stating a deadline. Daniel flinched, turning slowly. He looked awful. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale and stubbled. Good. I was glad. I wanted him to have suffered a fraction of the sleepless agony I had. "I know," he said quietly. "Evelyn, we have to. What are we going to tell him?" The "we" made my skin crawl. There was no "we." There hadn't been for a long time, and I'd just been too blind to see it. But he was right about one thing. We had to tell him something. A unified story. The first and last lie we would tell together as parents. "We tell him the truth," I said, meeting his gaze for the first time since the therapy office. His eyes widened in panic. "We can't tell an 8-year-old about that," he whispered, as if saying the words too loud would make them more real. "Not that truth, you idiot," I snapped, the flatness in my voice giving way to a sharp edge. The age-appropriate truth. That mommy and daddy love him very, very much. But we can't live together anymore. That we argued too much. That it's nobody's fault, especially not his. I'd rehearsed it in my head all night, paring it down to the simplest, least damaging bones. It was the essential structure. The foundation upon which his new, broken world would be built. It was the most important architectural plan I would ever draft. Daniel looked relieved, then immediately ashamed of his relief. He nodded, looking down into his coffee. "Okay, yeah, that's good." "You will not cry," I instructed him, my tone icy professional. It was the only way I could get through this. "You will not make this harder for him. You will be calm. You will be reassuring. You will tell him that you will always be his father, and that you will see him all the time. Do you understand?" He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. The one who was good in a crisis, who could be strong when it mattered. He straightened his shoulders slightly. I understand. The doorbell rang and both of us jumped. It was too early. It wasn't time yet. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense silence of the house. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The before ended now. The after was ringing the doorbell. I walked to the door, my legs feeling like they were made of wood. I pasted what I hoped was a neutral, maybe even slightly tired expression on my face. I opened the door. Leo stood there, his overnight bag slung over his shoulder, his hair a mess, a smudge of chocolate on his cheek from what was undoubtedly a pancake breakfast. His smile was wide and easy. Hey Mom, we stayed up super late and built this huge fort, and then Jake's dad made us chocolate chip pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, he announced, bursting past me into the entryway, all boundless energy and uncomplicated joy. The sheer normalcy of him was a physical blow. I wanted to fall to my knees and wrap my arms around him and never let go. I wanted to shield him from the ugliness that was about to crash into his perfect little world. I couldn't. All I could do was try to steer the ship of this conversation into the iceberg with as much grace as possible. That sounds amazing, sweetie, I said, my voice miraculously light. I closed the door, leaning against it for a moment to steady myself. Hey champ, Daniel said, coming out of the kitchen. His voice was a little too bright, a little too forced. Leo dropped his bag and ran to him, wrapping his arms around his waist. Hi Dad, did you know a group of jellyfish is called a smack? Jake told me. A smack. That's so weird. Daniel hugged him back, his eyes meeting mine over Leo's head. They were filled with a terrified sorrow. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not now. That is weird, Daniel said, his voice softer, more natural. Did you have a good time? The best. Leo detangled himself and looked between the two of us, his bright, intelligent eyes taking in the scene. The overturned dining table was right there, in the middle of the living area, a glaring, monumental testament to the night's chaos. We hadn't even righted it. We'd been too consumed by our own drama. Parental failure, item 1 on a long list that was just beginning. Leo's smile faltered. Whoa, what happened to the table? He looked from the wreckage to me, then to Daniel. His small face clouded with confusion. Did you guys have a party without me? The innocence of the question was like a knife to the heart. I took a step forward. Leo, honey, why don't we go sit down in the living room for a minute? The change in my tone registered. Kids are experts in the inflections of their parents' voices. He knew. Something was wrong. His shoulders slumped slightly, the buoyancy draining out of him. Okay, he said, his voice smaller. He walked to the couch and sat down, pulling a cushion onto his lap like a shield. Daniel and I sat on the opposite couch, a united front of disunity. The space between us felt like a mile. Leo, I began, my throat tight. I reached for his hand. His small fingers were warm in mine. Daddy and I need to talk to you about something important. He looked at me, his brown eyes so wide and trusting. Are you sick? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The worst thing his 8-year-old mind could conjure. No, baby, no, I said quickly, squeezing his hand. Nothing like that. We're both perfectly healthy. I took a shaky breath. It's just, Daddy and I, we haven't been getting along very well lately. We've been arguing more than we should. Leo's eyes darted to the overturned table again, understanding dawning. Is that why the table is broken? Yes, Daniel said, his voice thick. He cleared his throat. That was my fault, buddy. I got too angry. And that's not okay. But the important thing is that Mommy and I both love you more than anything in the whole world. That will never ever change. Leo was silent, processing. He looked down at the cushion in his lap, picking at a loose thread. So, you're getting a divorce? He asked. The word, spoken in his small, matter-of-fact voice, was devastating. He knew the concept. Kids at school had divorced parents. It was a thing that happened to other families, not to ours. Yes, honey, I said softly. We are. A single tear escaped and rolled down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily with the back of his hand, trying to be brave. Where will I live? Here with me, I said. In this house. And Daddy is going to find a new place to live very close by. You'll see him all the time. Weekends, and some days after school. It'll be different. But we're still a family. Just a different kind of family. He was crying in earnest now, silent tears tracking through the chocolate smudge on his cheek. He didn't sob or wail. It was a quiet, profound grief that was infinitely worse. "Is it because of me?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "No." Both Daniel and I said it at once, the force of our unison startling him. I moved to the couch and pulled him into my lap, holding him tight. He buried his face in my neck, his small body shaking. "Oh, my sweet boy, no. Never. This is absolutely 100% not your fault. This is a grown-up problem. You are the very best thing that ever happened to us. You are perfect." I held him and rocked him, murmuring reassurances into his hair. Over his shoulder, I saw Daniel crying silently, tears streaming down his face unchecked. He'd broken his instruction. But I couldn't blame him. This was the true cost of what he'd done. It wasn't the broken table or the burned belongings. It was this, our son trying to shoulder a blame that wasn't his to carry. We sat there for a long time, the three of us, tangled together in our heartbreak. The architecture of our family had been demolished. All we could do now was sit in the rubble and hold on to each other, while I silently vowed to be the one who would, somehow, design us a new shelter from the storm. The days after telling Leo bled into one another, a monochrome smear of pain and logistical nightmares. The house, once a sanctuary of light and open space, became a labyrinth of triggers. Every corner held a memory that had curdled. The coffee maker we'd chosen together. The throw blanket we'd argued over buying. The view of the flatirons we'd fallen in love with. It all felt tainted, like a beautiful landscape painted with poisoned ink. Daniel moved out. It was a swift, sterile process. He took a furnished apartment downtown, a generic beige box that held none of our history. He came by one Tuesday afternoon with a single suitcase and 2 boxes. He didn't look at me as he packed his clothes. The silence between us was no longer charged with anger. It was hollow, exhausted, the quiet after a bomb has gone off. He took his practical things. I was left with the ghost of him, and the crushing weight of the life we'd built. The first time Leo went for his weekend visit, the silence in the house was absolute. It wasn't peaceful. It was a sucking, oppressive vacuum. I wandered from room to room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. I ended up in his bedroom, sitting on the edge of his neatly made bed, holding a stuffed elephant he'd forgotten. The weight of my aloneness was a physical pressure on my chest. This was it. This was the life I had now. A beautiful, empty house and a custody schedule printed on the refrigerator. The legal papers arrived by certified mail. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words were so cold, so final. They reduced 11 years of shared life, love, inside jokes, and a child into a matter of assets and liabilities, parenting time and decision-making responsibilities. Daniel, through his lawyer, was being fair, scrupulously, infuriatingly fair. He wasn't contesting the division of assets. He was agreeing to more than standard child support. He was giving me the house, for now, for Leo's stability. His guilt was a tangible thing, written into every clause. It made me want to scream. I didn't want his guilt money. I wanted my life back. My lawyer, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Miriam Goldstein, became my general in a war I never wanted to fight. Our meetings were held in her sleek, downtown office that smelled of lemon polish and ambition. "He's being amenable, Evelyn," Miriam said, tapping her perfectly manicured finger on the proposed settlement. "This is a good offer. The financials are more than equitable. We'd be foolish not to take it and run." I stared out her window at the bustling streets of Boulder. People were living their lives, having lunch, shopping. The world was still spinning. "It's not about the money, Miriam. It's always about the money," she said, not unkindly, but with a weary pragmatism that came from decades of this. "The money is what provides the stability for your son. The money is what allows you to keep the roof over his head. The money is the practical outcome of the emotional failure. Focus on the practical." She was right, of course. But every line of the legal document felt like a violation. Deciding who got the retirement account felt like auctioning off our future. Deciding on a winter break schedule felt like carving up our holidays into chunks of mandated misery. The mediation session was the worst of it. A neutral, beige conference room. Daniel on one side with his lawyer, A man who looked like he'd been carved from a block of granite. Me on the other with Miriam. A mediator in the middle, trying to facilitate the dismantling of a family. Daniel wouldn't look at me. He addressed all his answers to the mediator or to Miriam. I agree to that. That's acceptable. I have no objection. His passivity was a new kind of betrayal. Where was the man who'd fought with me over the color of the bathroom tiles? Where was the man who'd argued passionately for a bigger garden? He'd checked out. He was just signing the papers, paying the price, and moving on. I wanted a fight. I wanted him to show a flicker of the passion that had once been for me, even if it was anger. But there was nothing. Just a hollowed-out shell, agreeing to everything. It was during a discussion about the summer vacation schedule that I broke. So, Father will have weeks 3 through 5 in July, the mediator said, looking at his calendar. Father, not Daniel, not your husband. Father. A biological and legal term. And I saw it. A flash of a future. Daniel taking Leo to Disneyland. Or to the beach. And Melissa would be there. The woman from the photo I'd burned. She'd be there, smiling, playing stepmom. She'd hold Daniel's hand. She'd help Leo build a sandcastle. She would inhabit the life that was supposed to be mine. A sound escaped me, a half choke, half sob. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs screeching against the floor. I need a minute, I gasped, my hand over my mouth. I fled the room, down the hall, pushing through the door to the women's restroom. I made it to a stall before the vomit rose, hot and bitter, heaving into the pristine porcelain toilet. It was pure reaction, my body expelling the poison of the image my mind had conjured. I slumped against the stall door, trembling, sweating. I couldn't do this. I couldn't sit in that room and calmly divvy up my son's childhood like we were splitting a pizza. I couldn't legally sanction the erasure of my family. Miriam found me a few minutes later. I was splashing cold water on my face, my makeup ruined, my hands still shaking. "Evelyn," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. She handed me a paper towel. "Breathe." "I can't," I whispered, my voice ragged. "I can't sit in there and pretend this is normal. I can't." "You can," she said firmly. "And you will. For Leo. For Leo. This isn't about you and Daniel anymore. It's about creating a stable, predictable framework for your son. The more we agree on now, the less we fight about later. The less he is caught in the middle," she put a hand on my shoulder. "Your job right now is not to feel. Your job is to be an architect. Design the structure. The foundation for his new life. You can fall apart later. In private. Not here." I looked at my reflection in the mirror. A pale, terrified woman stared back. An architect. I could do that. I knew about structures. I knew about load-bearing walls and foundations. This pain was the earthquake. My job was to design something that could withstand it. For Leo. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I straightened my jacket. I met Miriam's gaze in the reflection. "Okay," I said, "let's go design a framework." I walked back into that conference room. I didn't look at Daniel. I looked at the documents. I looked at the calendar. I became a machine of practicality. "I want right of first refusal written in," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "If he can't be with Leo during his parenting time, I get the option to take him before he offers it to a babysitter." I couldn't say her name. Daniel's lawyer looked at him. Daniel just nodded. Agreed, we worked through it. Holidays, birthdays, health insurance, college savings. I fought for every clause, every detail. Not for me, but for the small, freckled-faced boy who was the only real thing left in the world. I built a fortress of legal language around him. When it was over, when the temporary agreements were all initialed, I stood up. My legs held. Miriam gathered her papers. Daniel finally looked at me. There was something in his eyes, regret maybe, or a dawning respect for the cold, professional fury I'd just displayed. "Evelyn," he started. I didn't let him finish. I turned and walked out of the room, out of the building, into the cold Colorado air. I didn't fall apart. I got into my car, placed my hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and I drove. I drove away from the downtown offices, away from my empty house. I pointed the car west, toward the mountains. I drove until the streets turned into a winding highway, until the houses thinned out and the rocks rose up on either side of me. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, a place I'd been 100 times with Daniel and Leo. I got out of the car. The wind whipped my hair, cold and clean. I stood at the railing, looking out at the vast, indifferent, beautiful landscape. The mountains didn't care about my divorce. The sky didn't care about my broken heart. And in that moment, surrounded by such ancient, solid permanence, the paperwork, the legalities, the entire unbearable structure of the last few weeks finally crystallized into one simple, devastating truth. It was really over. The knowledge didn't make me vomit this time. It didn't make me cry. It just settled into my bones, a cold, hard fact. The unraveling was complete. All the threads of our life together had been pulled apart, sorted, and filed away. There was nothing left to dismantle. I was standing at the edge of the rubble, and the only thing left to do was to decide what to build in its place. The structure was built. The legal framework was in place. The movers had come and taken Daniel's share of the furniture, leaving ghostly outlines on the floors and strange, empty spaces that echoed. I had done everything I was supposed to do. I had been practical. I had been strong for Leo. I had designed the blueprint for our new, broken life with the cold precision my profession demanded. And now, I was collapsing. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a completely ordinary Tuesday. Leo was at a friend's house after school. The house was silent. I was standing in the kitchen, holding a single clean coffee mug, and I couldn't remember what I was supposed to do with it. Put it away? Make coffee? The simple task felt insurmountable, a complex equation I no longer had the energy to solve. A wave of dizziness hit me. I put the mug down, my hand shaking. The silence wasn't just silence anymore, it was a presence. It was in the rooms, in the air, pressing down on me from all sides. This house, my masterpiece, my sanctuary, felt like a museum dedicated to a dead civilization. Us. I walked through the rooms, my heart beginning to hammer a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs. I saw the faint scratch on the floor from when we'd first moved the sofa in. I saw the window pane where Leo, at 3, had pressed his nose, leaving a smudge I could never bring myself to clean perfectly. I saw the spot on the rug where Daniel had spilled red wine on our first anniversary in the house, and we'd laughed, and he promised to buy a new one, and I'd said no, it was part of our story. Now, the story had a terrible fucking ending. The grief didn't come in a wave this time. It didn't come as rage. It came as a void. A vast, black, sucking emptiness that opened up inside my chest and began to pull everything in. All the strength, all the practicality, all the carefully constructed resolve. It was all being devoured. My breathing hitched, coming in short, useless gasps. I couldn't get air. I stumbled into the living room, the room with the now righted table, and my legs gave out. I didn't sit on the couch. I slid down the wall and landed on the floor in a heap, my knees pulled to my chest. And then I cried. It wasn't the elegant, cinematic crying of a woman in a movie. It was ugly. It was raw. It was a primal, guttural sound that tore its way out of my throat, a sound I didn't even recognize as my own. Sobs racked my body, so violent I thought my bones might break. I cried for the 11 years. I cried for the man I thought I'd married. I cried for the future that had been stolen. I cried for my son, who would never again have his family whole under one roof. I cried for me, for the woman who was left behind. Who was she? I didn't know her. She was just a collection of broken pieces on a cold hardwood floor. The thoughts came, unbidden and cruel. You weren't enough. You should have seen it. You're a cliché, the discarded wife. You will be alone forever. This house will never be filled with laughter again. It will just be you and the silence until you die here alone. The darkness was complete. It was more than sadness. It was a profound existential despair. The feeling that nothing would ever be right or good or beautiful again. That the light had gone out of the world permanently. What was the point of any of it? The work, the bills, the grocery shopping, the forced smiles for Leo, it was all a meaningless performance on a stage that had collapsed. I don't know how long I stayed there, curled on the floor. Minutes. Hours. The sun moved across the room, and I didn't move with it. I was paralyzed by the weight of it all. This was the bottom. This was the true, unfiltered consequence of his actions. Not the divorce papers, not the separate living arrangements. This. This utter annihilation of the self. The phone rang, shrill and obscene in the silence. I flinched but didn't move. It went to voicemail. A moment later, my cell phone buzzed on the coffee table, then buzzed again, and again. Text messages. The world was trying to intrude on my void. With a monumental effort that felt like lifting a car, I reached up and fumbled for the phone. The screen was lit up with notifications, a reminder for a project deadline, a text from Miriam about signing a document, a text from my mom asking how I was holding up, and a text from Sarah, my oldest friend. Hey, checking in. You've been radio silent for days. I'm outside. Let me in. I brought wine. I stared at the words. I'm outside. Panic, sharp and acidic, cut through the numbness. I couldn't let her see me like this. This raw, this broken. I had to get up. I had to compose myself. I had to be the strong one, the one who was handling it. I tried to push myself up. My arms trembled and gave way. I slumped back against the wall. A fresh wave of tears came, this time of pure frustration and helplessness. I couldn't even get off the floor. The doorbell rang, one long, insistent press, then another, then a knocking. Not a polite tap, a firm, persistent pounding. Evelyn, I know you're in there. Open the door, I can see your car. Sarah's voice, muffled but determined, came through the solid wood. Go away, I thought, squeezing my eyes shut. Just go away. Evelyn Marie Lawson, if you don't open this door in the next 10 seconds, I'm calling the police for a wellness check. I am not kidding, she would do it. Sarah was the only person on earth who could boss me around and get away with it. The humiliation of the police showing up, of being found like this by strangers, was somehow greater than the humiliation of being found by my best friend. With a groan that was part sob, part surrender, I used the wall to haul myself upright. I was dizzy, disoriented. I wiped my face on my sleeve, but it was a futile gesture. My eyes were swollen, my nose was running, my whole face was a mess of tears and salt. I stumbled to the door and unlocked it, pulling it open a crack. Sarah stood there, holding a bottle of wine in one hand and a brown paper bag from my favorite bakery in the other. Her smile vanished the second she saw me. Oh, honey, she breathed, all the bluster gone from her voice. She didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed the door open, stepped inside, and kicked it shut behind her. She dropped the wine and the bag on the entryway table and wrapped her arms around me. I stiffened for a second, and then the dam broke again. I buried my face in her shoulder and sobbed, really sobbed, while she held me up, her hand rubbing slow circles on my back. I've got you, she murmured. I've got you. Let it out. It's okay. She led me to the couch and sat me down. She went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water and a box of tissues. She didn't say anything. She just sat with me while I cried myself out, until the sobs subsided into shaky hiccups and the void inside me felt a little less bottomless. Finally, I was empty. Spent. I leaned my head back against the couch and closed my eyes. I don't know how to do this, I whispered, my voice hoarse and broken. Do what? She asked softly. Any of it. Get through the next hour. Be a good mom. Look at myself in the mirror. I'm broken, Sarah. There's nothing left. She was quiet for a moment. Good, she said finally. My eyes flew open. Good? Yeah. Good. She picked up the brown paper bag and pulled out 2 iced cookies, shaped like teddy bears. Our childhood comfort food. She handed one to me. The old you, the one who was married to that asshole, the one who was trying to hold all this together with sheer willpower, she needed to break. She was built on a faulty foundation. You can't build something new on a cracked slab, Evie. You have to break it up. You have to get down to the dirt. I looked at the stupid, frosted cookie in my hand. A child's remedy for a world-ending problem. This is the dirt, I said. I know, she said, taking a bite of her own cookie. It's messy and it's dark and it feels like shit. But it's also clean. It's honest. And it's yours. All yours. Now you get to decide what you build on it. I didn't believe her. Not then. The emptiness was still too vast, the pain too acute. But her words were a pinprick of light in the absolute blackness. A single, tiny star in an otherwise empty sky. I was still on the floor, but I wasn't alone on the floor anymore. And for that one fleeting moment, It felt like maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep me from disappearing entirely. Sarah's words echoed in the emptiness for days. You have to get down to the dirt. I felt like I was buried in it. The days were a monotonous cycle of school runs, work calls I could barely focus on, and silent evenings that stretched into eternity. I was going through the motions, a ghost in the shell of my own life. The grief was no longer a sharp, stabbing pain. It was a dull, constant ache, a heavy blanket I couldn't shake off. It was during one of these aimless evenings, while scrolling through my phone to avoid the silence, that I saw it. An ad, targeted, no doubt, thanks to the digital gods who knew my life was in shambles. A women's introductory course at a local rock climbing gym, Boulder Peak Climbing. The irony of the name, given my town, was almost too much. A picture showed a woman, muscles straining, reaching for a hold high above her, her face a mask of intense concentration. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't having fun. She was struggling, but there was a purpose in her struggle that I had completely lost. Something about it resonated in the deep, numb place inside me. My grief had been a passive thing, something that happened to me. This was active. It was physical. It was a struggle you chose. Maybe I could pour all this pain, this anger, this feeling of being utterly lost, into something concrete. Maybe I could be exhausted in my body instead of my soul for a few hours. I signed up. It was an impulsive click, a moment of defiance against the inertia that was consuming me. Walking into the gym a week later felt like stepping onto another planet. The air smelled of chalk and sweat. The walls were a kaleidoscope of brightly colored plastic holds, ascending into complicated routes that looked impossible. The sound of grunts, the clinking of carabiners, and the soft thud of feet hitting mats formed a strange, energetic symphony. People of all shapes and sizes were clinging to the walls, falling and getting right back up. It was chaos. It was terrifying. I stood there in my new, stiff climbing shoes, feeling like the most profound imposter. What was I, a 37-year-old architect whose primary physical activity was carrying rolls of blueprints, doing here? The instructor gathered our small group of beginners. His name was Ben. He was probably in his late 20s, lean and wiry, with a calm, easygoing demeanor that immediately put me slightly more at ease. "All right, folks, welcome," he said with a smile. "The goal today isn't to get to the top. The goal is to learn how to fall." It was the most profound thing I'd heard in months. He taught us how to tie a figure-8 knot. My hands, usually so sure and precise with a drafting pencil, fumbled clumsily with the rope. I had to start over 3 times, my face flushing with frustration. Next, he taught us how to belay, the vital safety protocol of controlling the rope for your partner. The commands were simple, but they had to be perfect. Climbing. Climb on. Take. Slack. Falling. It was a language of absolute trust. I was paired with a friendly woman named Chloe, and we practiced lowering each other, the mechanics clunky and unfamiliar. Finally, it was time to climb. Ben pointed to a beginner's route, a gentle incline marked with large, friendly-looking green holds. "Just get a feel for it," he encouraged. "Find your balance. Listen to your body." I chalked my hands, the fine powder a new sensation. I reached up and took the first 2 holds. The plastic was rough under my fingertips. I stepped up, my body feeling awkward and heavy. I moved up a few more feet, my arms already beginning to tremble. It was harder than it looked. Much harder. My mind, usually a whirlwind of design calculations and to-do lists, went blessedly, utterly blank. There was no room for thoughts of Daniel, of divorce, of my empty house. There was only the next hold. The green one, just above my head. Reach. Grip, pull. I was about 10 feet off the ground when it happened. My foot slipped from a hold. For a split second, I was suspended in air, weightless. Panic flared, white-hot and primal. "Falling," I yelled, the word torn from me. I felt the rope go taut. Chloe, my belayer, caught me perfectly. I dropped only a few inches before the harness snugged tightly around my waist and thighs, holding me secure. I dangled there, spinning slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had fallen, and I was okay. Ben's voice came from below, calm and reassuring. "You good, Evelyn?" I took a shaky breath. "Yeah," I called down, my voice sounding thin. "I'm good." "All right, try again." "You can get back on the wall." I reached out a trembling hand, found a hold, and pulled myself back onto the vertical plane. The fear was still there, a live wire in my veins, but underneath it was something else. A tiny spark of triumph. I had fallen, and I hadn't died. I hadn't even gotten hurt. The system had worked. The trust had held. I didn't make it to the top of that route. My arms gave out a few moves later, and I lowered back to the mat, my muscles screaming in protest. I was breathing heavily, sweat beading on my forehead. I felt real. For the first time in months, I was acutely, physically present in my body. Not a thinking, grieving mind, but a working, straining, living body. I looked up at the wall. The green route still defeated me, but next to it was a slightly harder yellow route. And beyond that, a red one that looked terrifying. A strange thought occurred to me. This wasn't like my life. On the wall, the problems were right there in front of you. Color-coded, the holds were there. You could see the path, even if you couldn't yet reach it. You could see where you'd fallen, and you could try again, exactly the same way, or find a new way around. My life felt like an impossible, featureless sheet of rock. But this was a puzzle. A brutal, physical, exhausting puzzle. I turned to Chloe. "Your turn," I said, my hands already moving to the belay device. "Climb on." For the next hour, I climbed and I fell. I fell because my grip was weak. I fell because my footwork was clumsy. I fell because I misjudged a distance. Each fall was a little less terrifying. Each time, the rope caught me. Each time, I went back up. As I was leaving, muscles trembling with a new kind of fatigue, Ben gave me a nod. "You did great today. You've got a good instinct for it." "You coming back?" I looked back at the wall, at the woman I'd been an hour ago, standing on the ground and feeling hopeless. That woman was still there. But now, there was another version of her, 10 feet up, falling and getting back on. "Yeah," I said, a faint, unexpected smile touching my lips. "I think I am." The dirt was still there. The emptiness was still there. But that night, as I soaked in a bath, every muscle aching in protest, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't hope. It was simpler than that. It was the feeling of having found, quite literally, a first handhold. The climbing gym became my anchor, my sanctuary of struggle. Twice a week, like clockwork, I would drop Leo at his after-school program, drive to Boulder Peak, and lose myself on the walls. It was no longer a novelty. The initial spark of triumph had faded into something harder, more consistent, discipline. There were days I didn't want to go. Days when the grief felt like a lead blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and the thought of exerting any energy was laughable. But I went anyway. I had paid for the membership. It was on my calendar. It was a non-negotiable appointment with myself, and showing up for myself was a new, fragile habit I was desperate to cement. The familiar smells of chalk and sweat were no longer alien. They were the scent of focus. The sounds of grunts and falling bodies were no longer chaotic. They were the soundtrack of effort. I learned the regulars' faces. The impossibly strong young woman who could hang by her fingertips from holds the size of peanuts. The older man with a gray beard who moved up the wall with a slow, deliberate grace that spoke of decades of practice. We rarely spoke, but we nodded in recognition. We were all part of the same silent, striving congregation. My hands, once soft, became calloused. My fumbling figure-8 knot became muscle memory, tied with my eyes closed. The commands, climbing, climb on, became as automatic as breathing. I progressed from the easy green routes to the tricky yellows. My world shrank to the few square feet of wall in front of my face. There was no past, no future. There was only the next move. The next breath, the burn in my forearms. Ben, the instructor, would occasionally offer tips. "Flag your leg out for balance, Evelyn. Try shifting your hips into the wall. Trust your feet more." His advice was always practical, physical. It was about mechanics and efficiency. I applied it with the same analytical focus I used to solve a structural problem at work. My body was the project now, a complex, often frustrating system that needed to be understood and mastered. One Thursday evening, I was attempting a particularly stubborn yellow route. It had a nasty overhang about halfway up. I'd tried it 3 times already, and each time I'd peeled off at the same spot, my arms screaming, my core not strong enough to keep me close to the wall. Frustration was beginning to simmer. The old me, the one who demanded immediate competence, wanted to curse and walk away. But the wall doesn't care about your frustration. It is utterly, infuriatingly neutral. It just is. You either solve it, or you don't. I chalked up for a fourth attempt. I took a deep breath, shaking out my arms. I looked at the route not as an enemy, but as a puzzle. I'd been trying to muscle through the overhang. Maybe that was wrong. Climbing, I called to Chloe, my now regular belay partner. I started up, moving with a slower, more deliberate pace. I conserved energy. I found rests where I could, letting my arms straighten, shaking out the pump. I reached the crux, the point of my previous failures. Instead of lunging for the next hold, I stopped. I pressed my forehead against the cool plastic of a hold. I breathed. Look, plan. The next hold was high and to the right. My instinct was to reach for it with my right hand. But that would swing my body out, away from the wall, increasing the strain. What if I used my left? It was a more awkward cross-body move, but it might keep my hips in. I adjusted my feet, finding a better smear on the wall. I flagged my right leg out for counterbalance. I took a final breath and lunged with my left hand. My fingertips scraped the hold, caught it by the very edge. I wasn't secure. My body started to swing out. Panic flared. Trust your feet, Ben's voice in my head. I shoved my weight into my toes, pressing them hard against the wall. My core tightened, fighting the swing. For a terrifying second, I was held by a tenuous grip and sheer will. Then my body settled. I was stable. I'd done it. A guttural sound of effort and triumph escaped me. I found the next hold, and the next, and then I was past the overhang, pulling onto the easier upper section. My arms were on fire, but I didn't care. I tapped the top anchor, a rush of pure, unadulterated endorphins flooding my system. Nice, Chloe called from below. That was awesome. As she lowered me down, I was grinning like a fool. It was a small victory. A meaningless one in the grand scheme of a ruined marriage and a broken family. But it was my victory. Earned not by luck but by patience, analysis, and perseverance. Driving home, the high began to fade, but the feeling of competence remained. I had faced a problem, I had adapted, and I had overcome. The lesson was embarrassingly simple, but it was one I had forgotten. I could solve hard things. This new rhythm began to bleed into the rest of my life. The disciplined focus I learned on the wall translated to my work. I could sit at my drafting table for longer stretches, absorbed in the lines and calculations. The mental chatter quieted. The physical exhaustion was a gift. It meant I slept deeply, dreamlessly, instead of lying awake with a racing mind. One Saturday, Leo was at Daniel's. The house was quiet, but the silence felt different. It wasn't a void to be feared. It was a space to be filled. I put on music, not sad movie soundtracks, but something with a driving beat. I looked at the living room, really looked at it. It was still our room, filled with our things. With a determination I hadn't felt in months, I went to the garage and found a stack of moving boxes. I started in the living room. I took down the framed wedding photo that had been gathering dust on a shelf. I didn't burn it. I didn't smash it. I simply placed it in a box. I boxed up the books he'd left behind. The little knickknacks from trips we'd taken together. I didn't do it with rage. I did it with a quiet, methodical purpose. It was not an act of destruction. It was an act of curation. I was editing our life, keeping what served me, discarding what didn't. It was just one box, then two, but with each item packed away, the room felt a little more like mine. A little lighter, a little more open to new possibilities. That night, after a long shower, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was still tired. There were still shadows under her eyes. But her shoulders were straighter. The definition in her arms was new. There was a set to her jaw that hadn't been there before. The rhythm of my life was no longer the frantic, chaotic staccato of grief and panic. It had become something slower, more deliberate. The steady thump of my heart during a difficult climb. The methodical scratch of a pencil on drafting paper. The quiet tap of a cardboard box being sealed. It was the rhythm of rebuilding. One hold, one breath, one box at a time. The months folded into one another, marked not by calendars but by calluses and conquered roots. Rock climbing ceased to be an activity and became a language. I learned to read the wall, to see the subtle differences between a good hold and a thank God hold. My body, once an unfamiliar and betraying entity, became a trusted instrument. I knew its limits, its strengths, the specific burn in my lats that signaled a good session, the dull ache in my tendons that demanded rest. I was no longer a beginner. The easy yellows were my warm-up. The challenging reds were my projects. I'd developed a ritual. Every Saturday morning, while Leo was with Daniel, I would go to the gym, my chalk bag worn and familiar, my shoes molded perfectly to the shape of my feet. There was one route that had become my white whale, a vicious red route called Serpent's Spine. It was a test piece for intermediate climbers, a jagged line of crimps and slopers that snaked up a steeply angled wall. The crux, the hardest move, was a dynamic leap to a distant hold near the top, requiring explosive power and absolute commitment. I'd been working on it for 3 weeks. I could do all the moves in isolation, but linking them together, especially with the pump building in my forearms, felt impossible. This particular Saturday, the gym was quiet. The morning crowd hadn't yet arrived. It was just me, the hum of the ventilation system, and the serpent. I warmed up on a few easier routes, feeling the blood flow into my fingers. My mind was unusually still. The constant background hum of anxiety about work, about finances, about co-parenting logistics had faded into a low whisper. My world had shrunk to this single 40-foot-high problem. I stood at the base of the serpent's spine, chalked my hands methodically, and looked up. I traced the route with my eyes, visualizing each move, each shift of weight. I knew it by heart. Climbing, I said to the empty air. I often climbed auto belay now, finding a solitary peace in the self-reliance. The start was technical, a sequence of small, precise footwork and careful balance. I moved through it smoothly, my breathing even. I reached the first rest, a decent jug where I could shake out my arms. I was feeling good, strong. The middle section was a series of tension-based moves on slopers, holds with a negative angle that required open-handed grip strength and body tension to stay on. This was where the pump began to build, a familiar burning sensation flooding my forearms. I focused on my breath, on keeping my hips close to the wall, on trusting my feet. Move by move, I fought through it. I reached the shakeout before the crux. This was it. My arms were screaming. I could feel the pump threatening to take over, to turn my muscles into useless, rigid stone. I hung for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to recover what little strength I could. I looked up at the crux move. The target hold was a decent edge, but it was far. To reach it, I'd have to launch myself off 2 poor footholds and a marginal crimp, my body swinging out into open air. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach. Fear of falling, the fear of failure. But it was an old friend now. I knew how to use it, to let it sharpen my focus instead of paralyzing me. This wasn't just about climbing a route. This was about everything. This move was the moment Daniel had told me. This was the fear of signing the divorce papers. This was the terror of being alone. This was the feeling of my life swinging out into the unknown. Every time before, I had hesitated. I had second-guessed my strength. I had let the pump win. I had fallen, not today. I took one last, deep breath. I set my feet carefully, weighting them just so. I engaged my core. My entire being was focused on that one hold. There was no past, no future. Only this moment. This commitment. I pushed hard with my legs, exploding upwards, my right hand releasing the crimp and shooting for the edge. For a heart-stopping second, I was airborne, completely detached, flying through the void. My fingertips slapped the hold, caught the edge. My body swung out, the momentum pulling me away from the wall. I gritted my teeth, holding on with every ounce of strength in my screaming fingers. Trust your feet. The thought was a reflex. I found a smear with my toe, anything to control the swing. My body pendulumed back toward the wall. I stuck it. I was on. A raw, guttural roar of triumph tore from my throat, echoing in the empty gym. I didn't care. The pump was excruciating now, but the end was in sight. 2 more moves. I hauled myself up, my vision blurring with the effort, and slapped the top anchor. I let go, my body surrendering to the auto belay. I dangled there, spinning slowly, my chest heaving, my arms hanging uselessly at my sides. I was utterly spent, completely empty, and I had never felt more powerful in my entire life. As I was lowered down, the high was different from anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the endorphins. It was a deep, profound, and quiet certainty that had settled into my bones. I had faced the crux. I had committed to the void, and I had held on. Walking out of the gym into the bright Colorado morning, the world seemed sharper, more vivid. The air felt cleaner. The mountains in the distance looked less like monuments to my past and more like invitations. Driving home, I realized the metaphor was almost too perfect to be real. But it was. The route hadn't changed. The wall hadn't changed. I had changed. I had gotten stronger. I had learned the moves. I had practiced until the impossible became possible. The problems in my life hadn't vanished. The divorce was still final. The heartbreak was still a scar. The challenges of single parenting were still real. But I was no longer the woman who stood at the bottom looking up in despair. I was the woman who had learned to climb. I had found my strength not by avoiding the fall, but by learning to trust the rope. Not by denying the fear, but by moving through it. Not by waiting for the pain to end, but by using it to fuel my ascent. The serpent's spine was just a plastic puzzle on a wall in a gym. But the lesson it taught me was absolutely real. The cruxes in life don't go away. You just get better at climbing them. I had reached the top. And for the first time, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I belonged there. The victory on Serpent's Spine wasn't a finale. It was a catalyst. It rewired something fundamental in my brain. The problem-solving part of me, the architect who could see a structure in a blank page, had finally fully integrated with the woman who could physically execute a plan. I wasn't just getting through the days anymore. I was beginning to design them. This new confidence bled into my parenting. My time with Leo was no longer a fragile performance of, everything's okay. It became more authentic. I was present. I wasn't just watching him play, I was on the floor with him, building elaborate Lego towers that reached for the ceiling, our laughter echoing through the house in a way it hadn't in over a year. I wasn't just making him dinner, I was teaching him how to cook, letting him measure ingredients and make a glorious mess. The love was no longer tinged with a desperate, sorrowful fear. It was cleaner, stronger. One crisp autumn Saturday, with Leo at his father's, I drove to the gym with a new goal. Ben, the instructor, had been gently nudging me for weeks. "You're ready for the lead wall, Evelyn," he'd said, pointing to the taller, more imposing section of the gym where climbers clipped their own rope into quick draws as they ascended, a step up in both risk and commitment from the auto belay. It's a different head game. It's about trusting yourself to place protection, not just trusting the rope already above you. The lead wall was intimidating. A fall before you clipped the next draw meant a longer, penduluming plunge. It required not just strength but foresight, calm, and a cool head. I signed out a lead rope, my hands feeling oddly steady. I chose a route on the lower end of the grade spectrum, a blue that was well within my physical ability. The challenge wasn't the climbing, it was the process. I tied in, my figure-8 knot perfect. I checked my harness. I checked my belayer, a serious-looking young man who gave me a confident nod. The ritual was calming. "Climbing?" I said, my voice clear in the high space. The first few clips were easy. I climbed a few moves, slipped the rope into the carabiner, heard the satisfying click. Climbed a few more, another click. The rhythm was familiar, yet entirely new. I was my own safety system. I was placing my own anchors. I was about 15 feet up, reaching for the next draw, when my foot skimmed a hold. It was a tiny error, a misplacement of an inch. But it was enough. My weight shifted wrong, my grip slipped, and I was off. "Falling," I yelled. It wasn't the short, tidy fall of the top rope. This was a real fall. I dropped several feet before the rope caught me, the last clipped draw arresting my fall with a jarring yank. I swung out, the world tilting, my heart leaping into my throat. And then, I was hanging. Safe. The system had worked. My system. My clips had held. My belayer lowered me to the ground. My knees were a little weak, but a huge, exhilarated grin spread across my face. I had fallen on lead. And I was fine. More than fine. I was electrified. I rested for a few minutes, then got right back on the wall. This time, I climbed with a new kind of assurance. I didn't climb fearlessly, that would be foolish, but I climbed with the confirmed knowledge that I could manage the fear, that I could make the right decisions under pressure, that I could protect myself. I finished the route cleanly, clipping the anchors at the very top, 20 feet higher than I'd ever been on the auto belay. As I was lowered down, spinning slowly, I looked out over the gym from that new height. I saw the beginners nervously tying in, the strong climbers working on their projects, the community of it all. I was a part of this. I belonged here. That night, after a long shower, I didn't feel the usual ache of loneliness when I walked through the quiet house. The silence felt like peace. I made myself a cup of tea and did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I sat at my drafting table, not for work, but for me. I opened a fresh sketchbook. I picked up a pencil, and I began to draw. I didn't draw buildings. I didn't draw floor plans. I let my hand move freely across the page. I drew the fluid, powerful lines of a body in motion. I drew the curve of a rock wall. I drew the abstract shape of fear and the sharp, angular lines of overcoming it. I drew without a plan, without a client, without a goal. I was creating for the sheer joy of creation. I was rediscovering a part of myself that had been buried under the weight of being a wife, a mother, an employee, the artist, the dreamer, the woman with ideas that belonged only to her. A few days later, a large flat package arrived in the mail. I opened it to find the architectural rendering I'd commissioned of the mountain cabin months ago, before my life had fallen apart. I'd completely forgotten about it. I unrolled the heavy paper on my dining table, weighing down the corners with coffee mugs. It was beautiful. A modern yet rustic structure, all wood and glass, nestled into a hillside with a breathtaking view of the peaks. It was the dream home we were going to build after Leo finished elementary school. Our dream. I looked at it for a long time. I felt the ghost of the old pain, but it was distant, like an echo from another room. This drawing didn't represent a lost future anymore. It was just a design. A good one. I picked up a red pencil from my drafting table. I didn't scribble it out. I didn't tear it up. I simply began to make notes in the margin. Simplify roofline. Expand west-facing windows. Reposition deck for better morning light. I wasn't erasing the past. I was revising it. I was taking the good bones of an old dream and redesigning it for a new one. My dream. Not ours. Mine. The following weekend, I took Leo on a drive into the mountains. We didn't have a destination. We just drove, windows down, the scent of pine filling the car. We found a hiking trail we'd never been on before and started walking. Leo scrambled ahead, throwing rocks into a creek, his joy infectious. We reached a lookout point and sat on a sun-warmed boulder, sharing a bag of trail mix. The view was immense. Endless peaks rolling away into a hazy blue distance. "Mom," Leo said, his mouth full of peanuts. "Is Dad happy?" The question was so simple, so direct, it stole my breath for a second. I looked out at the horizon, choosing my words carefully. "I think he's trying to be, honey," I said. "Just like we are." He nodded, processing this. "Are you happy?" I put my arm around him, pulling him close. I thought about the fear I'd faced on the wall. The quiet pride of a finished drawing. The simple peace of this moment, here with him. "I'm getting there, buddy," I said, and meant it. I'm really getting there. We sat in silence for a while, watching a hawk circle on a thermal current far below us. I wasn't at the summit of a mountain, but I was on a summit of my own making. The climb had been brutal. The fall had been terrifying. But the view from here? And Askin. It was worth every single difficult step. The idea was born out of a desire to share my newfound language with Leo. He'd seen my calloused hands, heard my stories of conquering routes, seen the quiet confidence that had settled into my posture. His curiosity was piqued. "Can I try it, Mom? The climbing?" he'd asked one evening, looking at a photo on my phone of me on Serpent's Spine. The gym felt too intense, too indoor. I wanted his first experience to be different. I wanted it to be about the sky and the rock, not plastic and air conditioning. A guided family climbing day on one of Boulder's famous beginner-friendly crags seemed like the perfect solution. It was safe, structured, and would give him a real taste of the outdoors I'd come to love. I booked it online for a Saturday. The forecast was perfect. Bluebird sky, crisp autumn air. As we pulled into the crowded trailhead parking lot, I felt a flicker of my old social anxiety. Groups of climbers were gearing up, their laughter and easy camaraderie, a reminder that I was still, fundamentally, a solo act. Leo, however, was buzzing with excitement, practically vibrating out of his car seat. We found the meeting spot where a small cluster of people were gathering around a man checking names off a clipboard. He had his back to us, organizing a pile of harnesses. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of strength, and sun-bleached brown hair that curled slightly under a well-worn baseball cap. "Name?" he asked, without turning around, his voice a warm, low baritone. "Evelyn and Leo Lawson," I said. He turned, and my breath caught for a fraction of a second. It wasn't that he was classically handsome, though he was certainly attractive in a rugged, outdoorsy way. It was his eyes, a calm, steady blue, the color of a high mountain lake. They held a directness, an unshakable patience that was immediately grounding. "Evan," he said, offering a smile that created gentle crinkles at the corners of his eyes. He shook my hand, his grip firm and confident, then crouched down to Leo's level. "And you must be Leo. Ready to get on some real rock?" Leo, usually shy with strangers, nodded vigorously. "Yeah. My mom climbs in the gym. She did a super hard one called the snake spine. Serpent spine is a good one," Evan said, his smile widening as he looked back up at me with a new spark of interest. "A climber. Excellent. You're gonna have a fun day then." His attention returned to Leo, never making me feel like my skill was a threat or a challenge, just a fact. "Let's get you two geared up." He worked with an efficient, practiced ease. He helped Leo into a tiny harness, checking the fit with a careful, professional touch. When it was my turn, his hands were impersonal and respectful, double-checking my buckles without a hint of presumption. "So, how long have you been climbing?" he asked as we hiked the short, rocky trail to the base of the crag. "About 8 months," I said. It became a thing I needed to do. He nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. "It has a way of doing that. Gets in your blood. The gym's great, but there's nothing like the real thing." He pointed out features on the rock as we walked, explaining the geology in an accessible way that kept Leo enthralled. "See the different color of that rock? That's where the granite meets a schist intrusion. Makes for some interesting holds." He wasn't just a guide, he was an educator, passionate and patient. At the base of the cliff, he gave a safety briefing that was both thorough and engaging, making the kids in the group laugh while ensuring everyone understood the gravity of the rules. He moved with a relaxed economy of motion, effortlessly tying knots and setting up the top rope anchors high above us. He let me belay Leo myself, watching my technique with a sharp but approving eye. "Your figure 8 is perfect," he noted. "You've got a good belayer's focus." Leo scrambled up the easy route like a little spider monkey, fearless and ecstatic. "Mom, look at me, I'm doing it." His joy echoed off the canyon walls. "I see you, sweetie." "You're a natural," I called back, my heart swelling with a pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. When it was my turn, I chose a slightly more challenging route to the side. I wanted to move on the real stone. The rock felt different under my fingers, grittier, more alive than plastic. I lost myself in the movement, the familiar flow state taking over. About halfway up, I went for a hold that looked more positive than it was. My hand slipped. It was a minor slip, nothing dramatic, but it broke my rhythm and sent a tiny shower of gravel down. "Watch me," I called out instinctively. Below, I saw Evan's hand come up and gently rest on the rope above my belayer's device, a silent, vigilant backup. He didn't take over. He didn't panic, he was just there. Solid, assuring. "You're good, Evelyn," his voice floated up, calm and steady. "Take your time. The hold is just above your head, a little to the right." I found it, steadied myself, and finished the route. When I was lowered down, he gave me a nod. "Nice recovery. That's a sneaky one." Catches everyone. The day unfolded in a blur of sunshine, laughter, and the satisfying click of carabiners. Evan was a natural leader, effortlessly managing the different personalities in our group, encouraging the hesitant, and sharing beta with the more experienced. He was endlessly patient with the children, especially Leo, high-fiving his successes and calmly talking him through his moments of fear. During a break, while Leo was devouring a granola bar and chattering with another kid, I found myself sitting on a rock next to Evan, sipping from my water bottle. "He's a great kid," Evan said, nodding toward Leo. "Thanks. He's having the time of his life." "This was a great idea. It's the best office in the world," he said, gazing out at the view of the valley below. Even on the days when the weather turns. He took a sip of his own water. "So, you're an architect? Leo was telling me you design buildings." "I try to," I said, surprised Leo had shared that. "Mostly commercial stuff lately. Libraries, small office buildings." "That's incredible," he said, and he genuinely sounded like he meant it. "Creating something from nothing. That's a special kind of magic. I can barely draw a straight line with a ruler." I laughed. "Well, I'd probably get lost if I tried to lead a hike." "Different skill sets." He smiled, those blue eyes crinkling again. "Guess we'd make a good team then." The comment was light, offhand, but it landed somewhere deep inside me. It felt easy, not like a lime, not like a pressure, just a simple, genuine observation. The session was winding down. As we packed up the gear, a sudden gust of wind whipped across the cliff face, strong enough to make us all stagger a step. It was immediately followed by a distant rumble of thunder. The brilliant blue sky had been swiftly invaded by dark, bruised clouds rolling in over the peaks. The mountain weather was turning on a dime. Panic flickered in the group. A few people started hastily shoving gear into packs. Evan, however, didn't flinch. He straightened up, assessed the sky with a practiced eye, and held up a hand. His voice was calm, a rock in the sudden tension. "All right, everyone, no need to rush. Rushing leads to mistakes. We're perfectly safe. Let's just get packed up methodically. The storm is moving northeast. We've got time to get down before it hits here." His calm was infectious. The group settled, following his quiet instructions. He moved among us, helping, directing, his presence a steadying force. He wasn't just reciting a script, he was utterly unshakable. In the middle of the minor chaos, he caught my eye and gave me a small, reassuring wink. It was in that moment, watching him be incredibly patient and calm in a stressful situation, that I felt something I thought had been permanently cauterized inside me, a spark of attraction. It wasn't just his looks, it was his competence, his quiet authority, his genuine nature. It was the way he had been with Leo. The way he had been with me, respectful, interested, but not pushing. It was terrifying and exhilarating. We made it back to the parking lot just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. People scattered to their cars with hurried thank yous. I got Leo buckled in and turned to say goodbye to Evan. He was loading the last of the company gear into a beat-up, practical SUV. "Thanks for an amazing day," I said, the rain starting to fall a little harder now. "My pleasure," he said, wiping a droplet from his forehead. "You two were a great part of the group." He hesitated for a second, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was simple, just his name, number, and the guiding company's logo. "If you ever want to get out on the rock again, give me a shout. I do private guiding too. Or, you know what," he trailed off, uncharacteristically hesitant for the first time all day. "Maybe just coffee sometime." I took the card. The paper felt solid in my hand. I looked from it to his face, to those calm blue eyes waiting for my response without expectation. I smiled. A real, genuine smile that felt unfamiliar on my face. "I'd like that," I said. I got in my car, the rain now pattering steadily on the windshield. I looked at the card in my hand. Evan, guide, mountaineer. Leo was already half asleep in the back seat. I started the car, and as I pulled out of the parking lot, I realized the storm inside me, the one that had raged for so long, had finally quieted. In its place was the gentle, steady patter of rain, and the quiet, thrilling uncertainty of a new beginning. The business card sat on my kitchen counter for a week. It became a tiny, cardboard monument to my indecision. I'd pick it up, put it down, wipe a crumb away from beside it, my heart doing a nervous little tap dance against my ribs each time. Calling him felt like stepping onto a lead route without checking the gear. It was a trust fall of a different kind. Did I trust myself to navigate this? Did I trust the world not to pull the rug out from under me again? Sarah's advice was characteristically blunt. For God's sake, Evie, it's coffee, not a marriage proposal. Call the man. If he's a weirdo, you never have to see him again. If he's not, well, you could use a friend who doesn't have to listen to you because of a shared genetic code or a legal contract. She was right. It was just coffee. My hand only shook a little when I finally texted him, a simple, straightforward message that I rewrote 5 times. Hey Evan, it's Evelyn from the Family Climb. Coffee sounds great. His reply was almost immediate. Great, how about the Uplift Cafe on Pearl State? Tomorrow 10 a.m., it was a perfect choice. A bright, airy place with excellent coffee and no history for me, neutral territory. I arrived 5 minutes early, a habit born from a professional life of deadlines. I chose a table near the window, my stomach fluttering. I felt like I was back in high school. It was ridiculous. I was a mother. A professional. A divorcee. I'd faced down a cheating husband and a 5-time C overhang. Why was a cup of coffee with a pleasant man so terrifying? I saw him before he saw me. He was coming down the street, dressed in jeans and a simple gray Henley, his hands shoved in his pockets. He looked comfortable in his own skin, a trait I found incredibly appealing. He pushed the door open, his eyes scanning the room. When they landed on me, he smiled, that easy, crinkle-eyed smile, and my nervousness didn't vanish, but it settled. Hey, he said, sliding into the chair opposite me. You found the place. I did. Good recommendation. The conversation didn't flutter or stall. It just flowed. We talked about coffee, about the bizarre weather patterns in the Rockies, about the best hikes for wildflowers in the spring. He asked about my work, and he actually listened to my answer about the challenges of designing a new public library, his questions insightful. It must be amazing, he said, stirring his latte, to create a space that will hold so many stories. So much quiet joy. I blinked, surprised by the poetry of it. Daniel had always seen my job as a source of income, a practical necessity. Evan saw the art in it. He told me about his path to becoming a guide, a degree in environmental science, a corporate job that made him miserable, a transformative backpacking trip in Patagonia, and the decision to turn his passion into his life. It's not always stable, he admitted with a shrug. Winter can be lean, but I go to sleep tired in the right way. I never dread Monday mornings. I understood that language. It was the language of the wall, of doing something that fed your soul, not just your bank account. There was no pressure, no awkward lulls. It was 2 hours of easy, genuine connection. When we finally stepped out onto the sunny street, I felt a pang of disappointment that it was over. I had a really nice time, Evelyn, he said, his hands back in his pockets. Me too, I said, and I meant it. I'd like to do it again. If you would, I would, I said. And we did. Again and again. It was never extravagant. A hike with Leo where Evan pointed out animal tracks and the names of peaks. A picnic in Chautauqua Park with sandwiches that tasted infinitely better eaten on a blanket on the grass. A movie night at my house where we let Leo choose some animated epic and all fell asleep on the couch before the end credits. It was in the small, quiet moments that I saw his character. The way he always remembered to ask Leo about a specific school project. The way he listened, really listened, when I talked about the frustrations of co-parenting. The way he showed up exactly when he said he would, his calm presence a steady anchor in the whirlwind of my life. He was teaching me a new rhythm. The rhythm of taking things slow. The rhythm of building something piece by piece, without a blueprint, without a deadline. One evening, about 3 months after that first coffee, he came over after Leo was asleep. We were sitting on the back deck, watching the stars emerge over the Flatirons, sharing a blanket against the chill. The house behind us was quiet, finally feeling like a home again, not a monument. I like this, he said, his voice quiet. I like you. I like Leo. I like Leo. I like this. Us. My breath caught. We've been careful, dancing around the edges of defining this thing growing between us. I like it too, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to look at me, his face serious in the dim light. I know your foundation was shaken. I know you're still building. I'm not here to rush you. I'm just here to be a part of the construction crew. If you'll have me. It was the most him thing he could have said. No grand declarations. No promises he couldn't keep. Just a simple, honest offer of presence. Of partnership. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition. Of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a very long time. I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his. His grip was warm and sure. "I'd like that," I said. "The crew could use someone who's patient and calm." "The forewoman can be a bit of a perfectionist." He laughed, a soft, warm sound in the dark. "I think the forewoman is pretty incredible." He leaned in and kissed me then. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion or desperate need. It was a kiss of promise. A kiss of beginning. It tasted of honesty and patience and the faint, sweet hint of the coffee we drank. It was the first brick laid in a new foundation, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep into my bones that this one was level. This one was strong. This one was built to last.